Hello?
Hello, Mr. Bolden.
Yes.
Hi, it's Brent Holland, sir.
All right, Brent.
How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing very good, very good.
It's good to hear from
Just
you.
got back from, yes, I just got back from Dallas, Texas at the JFK convention there.
Well, tell us about it. How did it go?
Oh, it went very well, very well. We had some of the notable authors that were there and who gave dissertation and speeches on many of their books that they wrote.
What was the most impressive one for you, sir?
Well, I tell you, I liked Waldron myself. If I were to say one, who was standing out, Waldron gave Lamar Walton and his legacy of secrecy.
That's right,
yes,
sir.
He gave a very, very extensive overview of some of the things that he discovered concerning the assassination of our president.
Do you remember one in specific, sir? Perhaps an example?
Well, this criminal connection here in Chicago, the connection between Tony Alcado and Giancano and his solicitation by the government to take part in the assassination of Castro in Cuba. He went into that quite extensive, and I think that he brought a lot of clarifying material with him, and the audience, as a matter of fact, greeted him very handsomely for his exposition concerning that, and how that many of these men who were criminals and who were high in the mob echelon actually were working for the CIA. And that's a couple of the things that he brought forward.
I see, sir. And I know you did extensive research yourself. Well, you were involved in that investigation in Chicago just before Kennedy came there. Did a lot of that ring true for you also?
Yes,
Lamar was
that's right.
talking about?
Yes, from what I heard, of course, I didn't know at that particular time that Giancana had been solicited, but we did have a lot of activity in Chicago concerning Cubans who had made certain threats against the president and seemed to have had foreknowledge of his assassination.
Okay. How about if we go into the Chicago thing right away, sir? I was going to leave that kind of towards the middle, but that's fine. I mean, we're on the subject now. Can you talk about, this would be just after you left the White House detail and you were back in Chicago now. Can you talk about the investigation and the threat that was put against President Kennedy? It was 2 weeks before his Dallas trip, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that's right. As a matter of fact, there were a couple of investigations that were going on a couple of weeks before his death, assassination in Dallas, Texas. One of them involved a Cuban named Echeverria, who, to a Secret Service informant, had said that the president was about to be assassinated. Now, this happened in the last week of October. So the Secret Service had an agent next to Echeverria who verified that these words were in fact spoken. He said that the president was going to be assassinated because that he was withholding his support from the exiled Cubans in Miami, Florida. Now, we had already had foreknowledge also of an assassination plan against the president that emanated in Miami during a telephone conversation between a couple of suspects. Now, when the president was supposed to come to Chicago on November the 1st, we got a call at the Secret Service office from the FBI who said that they had an informant, a lady, who had seen rifles and the route that President Kennedy was supposed to take when he arrived in Chicago going to Soldier Field for the Army-Navy football game. And the Secret Service here in Chicago talked with the person, the informant, and set up a surveillance on these men who were alleged to have been two Cubans who were being visited by European gentlemen. But that investigation fell through. As for the Echeverria investigation, now what happened on that, that investigation was turned over to the FBI after the president was assassinated, and we didn't hear anything else from that Echeverria investigation anymore. We were told to tear up all of the notes that we had concerning that Echeverria investigation, and as far as we were concerned, the Echeverria investigation did not exist. Now, since they took such great pains in covering up this Echeverria thing, I'm sort of the opinion that the Echeverria investigation and the investigation of the Cubans who had the rifles in the rooming house, I think that that's one and the same investigation, and that Echeverria was indeed mixed up with these people, although the Secret Service never brought that out, and the Warren Commission was never advised of those facts to my knowledge.
There's some puzzling questions there for sure, sir. And I agree with your speculation. I think it was covered up, as so many other investigations surrounding this tragic day were covered up. Can you speculate a little bit further as to perhaps your own views of why it was covered up?
Well, I think that it involved the CIA echelon, members of the CIA, so in depth, and the FBI, and also the terrible investigations that the Secret Service had done in reference to these suspected assassins. That it would have not only have been embarrassing, but it would have looked to the American people as if that these things were planned by these organizations. Now, it's no question about it that the FBI and the Secret Service were involved in the Echeverria investigation. And I think that the whole thing was that the U.S. government, after the president was assassinated, wanted to assure the American people that Oswald was the lone assassin. So in order to sell that bill of goods to the American people, they came out with this with the cover-up, and they covered up everything that would probably, point into another direction. They did that in hopes that the American people would buy that thing that they were selling called the truth, but that was absolutely falsehood.
Unbelievable. Why do you think it was so important for the CIA to sell this lone nut assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, after the assassination? What was it they were trying to cover up? Their own embarrassment?
Yes, their own ineptitude, and just like the Secret Service, that
yes,
they had not given these investigations the importance that they deserved. And there were several reasons for that, I believe. I think that many of your high echelon people in the CIA and the FBI and the Secret Service were not very well enthused with what the president was doing. He was talking about eliminating some of the CIA and changing its format and different things. And I think that actually it was a good thing that for them that the President Kennedy was dead, because that many of them relaxed after that, because they felt that they would have a better opportunity to pursue their careers.
Folks, we're speaking with none other than Abraham Bolden. Abraham Bolden, of course, the first African-American Secret Service agent, handpicked by JFK himself. His book, The Echo from Dealey Plaza. And I have a confession to make. I have read this book now 6 times. This book should be made into a feature film. Will Smith should star as Abraham Bolden. This is an essential, important book, not only to the American public, to the world in large. This is a story that is crying out to be told. He is a true American hero, folks, and I say that with all reverence and all conviction. This is the second time I've had the honor to interview Mr. Bolden, and I can tell you from experience, Mr. Bolden is authentic. He is the real deal, folks. Let's start off at the beginning now, Mr. Bolden. You're the first African-American Secret Service agent. How did that come about? How did you meet Mr. Kennedy?
Well, I became a Secret Service agent October the 30th of 1960. And of course, the president at that time was a senator and was running for the presidency and was elected in November of 1960. Well, the president ran a close race here in Chicago, and he only won Chicago by about 8,000 votes. He won Cook County by 8,000 votes. And President Kennedy didn't know what a chore that was for Mayor Dealey, and I think that on the lighter end, he knew that probably 7,999 of those 8,000 votes were dead people. But anyway, the president won by that margin here in Chicago. So the president was coming here to thank Mayor Dealey for the machine, the work that the machine had done in putting him over and out in front of Nixon by that margin. So being a new agent, they assigned me to an innocuous spot over in the place where the president was living, not living at McCormick Place, where the president was going to be speaking that night of April 28th when he was coming here for the big banquet. Well, they put me out in front of a washroom on the lower level of McCormick Place, a place where I figured that seeing the president was slim to none. And so about 8:30 that night on April 28th, 1961, the president was running a little late, and his motorcade arrived at 8:30 p.m. And I saw all of these cameras flashing up on the floor just above me. There were steps that were leading down the steps into this washroom. And I was saying to myself, I sure wish I could be up there to see President Kennedy. And all of a sudden, at the top of the steps and walking down those steps towards me was the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. And the first thing he wanted to do when the motorcade stopped was use the washroom, and there I stood right in front of the washroom. It was such an ironic thing. You know, they thought that they were hiding me on that lower level of McCormick Place, and that's where I met the president. So he stopped in front of me. John Kennedy stopped in front of me and smiled. He asked me, "Are you a Secret Service agent, or are you one of Mayor Dealey's finest?" And I smiled back. I told him, "I'm a Secret Service agent, Mr. President." And during the conversation, he asked me point blank, and with a smile on his face, but I could see he was serious about it. He asked me if there had ever been any Negroes on the Secret Service White House detail in Washington, D.C. And I answered, "Not to my knowledge." He asked me, "Would you like to be the first?" And his eyes glittered when he said that, because he knew what was going to be my response. I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. President." And he said, "I'll be looking forward to seeing you in Washington, D.C. And he went on to use the washroom. He came out and he waved at me and went back up the steps. Oh, man, what a beautiful day. I'm glad you asked me about that.
What a wonderful, wonderful experience, sir. John F. Kennedy in the person. Was there anything about Mr. Kennedy that kind of surprised you? Was he taller than you thought? Was he thinner than you thought? Heavier, perhaps?
He was a little taller than I thought that he would be. And also his hair, I don't know whether there was any dye in it or not, but it seems like in person his hair was a lot redder than it appeared on television. It seemed like a darker brown on television, but it was actually almost red that night. Of course, the lights may have had something to do with it, but I got that impression also when I was in Washington, D.C. There was a reddish glow to his hair. And he had one of the most beautiful smiles that anybody could ever have, a very serious person. And I really enjoyed being in his company and working for the President of the United States.
That night, sir, when you went home, did you wake your wife to tell her what was happening?
Oh, I woke my wife up, I'm telling you, and did I ever. She probably heard me when I was getting out of the car in the garage. I think the rest of the neighborhood probably heard me too. I could never have imagined, I'd had watched this young, impressive senator in his battle against Richard Nixon and all of the untruths that had been hurled his way and the improbability of it becoming president.
Now, I do want to talk about what happened to you, but one last question about these agents that won't come forward even to this day. They displayed some remorse, but they don't have the courage in themselves yet to come forward. What is so explosive that they're still trying to cover? Is it their own ineptitude, or is there something more festering there?
Well, one thing that's festering some of those agents, I know absolutely about two of them, is they stood by and let reports that they had submitted prior to the president's assassination. There were many reports that they submitted to the supervisor and special agent in charges of the United States Secret Service. They stood by and let those reports be redictated by the supervisor of the Secret Service in the Chicago office, Mr. Maurice G. Martineau. Then those reports were redictated as to have happened after that the president was assassinated. Now, see, that's a very serious thing, because they not only stood by and watched a felony committed, which is submitting a false report to a government agency, but they became a part of it. Now, for them to come forth and to give that information, they have to also give information that incriminates them, because they became a part of a conspiracy to hoodwink the American people.
Oh, I see, sir. That makes perfect sense to me. Folks, if you're just joining us, we are speaking with the one, the only Abraham Bolden, and I say that with all conviction. This man is an incredible human being. His book, The Echo from Dealey Plaza, can be got at any Chapters Indigo right across Canada. Just to let you know, Mr. Bolden, Chapters Indigo is our version of Barnes Noble. And
yes, I see.
And it can be gotten, folks, as I said, any Chapters Indigo right across the country. If you go to the www.brenthollandshow.com website, right on the front page, you'll see a picture of the book cover. Just click on that. That'll take you to Chapters online. You can order it. Probably be there within the next 24 or 48 hours tops. It's an explosive book. I've read it 6 times. As I say, this is an incredible story that is crying out to be told. Is a story of bravery, is a story of fortitude. It's everything that human beings should strive to be, and Mr. Bolden encompasses all those wonderful, wonderful qualities. Sir, I was wondering if we could talk now about the horrible things that took place right after the assassination. But just to preface that, where were you November 22nd, 1963, when you heard the news about Mr. Kennedy?
I was giving a nightclub owner here in Chicago at 37th and Indiana. He had a tavern down there where he served liquor, and I was inside taking some handwriting samples from him, because somebody had passed a forged government document to him in the payment for drinks. And so normally we have to take a handwriting sample from whoever had handled that particular negotiable instrument to exclude them as being the party that forged the name of the payee. And so I was standing there, and it was about 11:45 that we were taking the handwriting samples. And suddenly there was an announcement. I remember it was on Channel 2, what we call CBS here in Chicago, that the president had just been shot. Now, at that particular time, no announcement was made that he was dead, but that he had been shot. But I knew right away that under those circumstances, the president probably would have been killed, because I thought that his protection would not react, and they didn't.
So the prophecy came true. Indeed,
that's right.
It was proven also that most of the agents had been up all night drinking. Some of them not even gone to bed. And
absolutely. And when I made that charge shortly after President Kennedy was assassinated, and I made the charge that those agents were up that night. See, I didn't know for a fact, but I knew that by habit, that's what they did. You see.
I understand.
And so I knew them. I knew them, and so as it turned out, I told the chief of the Secret Service, U.E. Bauman, that they would not react. And if you look at the picture when that bullet struck the president in the head, they're still standing on the running board. not one of President Kennedy's guards went to protect him. Now, Clint Hill was assigned to the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, and he was very alert. Clint Hill and I were good friends, and I always did think that Clint Hill was a very efficient agent. But I knew that those agents standing on the running board would be in no condition to react, and they were not.
And they were not. And had
no,
they...
they were not.
Sir, I would imagine you may have run those scenes over and over in your head, perhaps putting you on that car that day. I should tell folks, Mr. Bolden was not on duty that day, protective duty. He was not there. He was in Chicago, as he just said. Sir, had you have been there, would you have taken that fatal shot for Mr. Kennedy?
I sure would have, because not only that was my duty. That was my duty to do that under the Constitution of the United States, and nobody forced me to go into the United States Secret Service. It's the same as a soldier in uniform. They take many, many bullets from people all around the world. We have young men, 17, 18, 19 years old, being brought back in flag-shaped coffins. Now, we have to, the American people who are here and who are in this country, have to have that same idea of sacrifice for the country that those soldiers have. Even though that we have on the Kuppenheimer suits and all the different type of hats and things, we still are in a fight. And that fight is to protect the Constitution of these United States of America with our lives if need be. And President Kennedy, having been the chief executive of that Constitution, deserved all of the loyalty that a soldier would give for his country.
Sir, let's talk about the Warren Commission now. Did they ever contact you at all? How did that come about?
The Warren Commission, they never did. The Warren Commission never contacted me. I was only contacted by an official body of the United States government after I was released from prison. I believe it was in 1979 when the Congress took up their investigation of the assassination of the president.
I know you made an effort to contact the Warren Commission yourself, sir. I was wondering if we could talk about that and what led to your arrest just after that.
Yes, well, I had told a couple of agents that the first time that a chance I got to go to Washington, D.C., that I wanted, the Warren Commission was sitting at that particular time. They were hearing testimony. But according to what I was reading in the newspapers, they weren't hearing anything concerning the investigations that we had investigated of live and growing programs and conspiracy to assassinate the president. I didn't hear some of the names that I knew had been associated with such conspiracies. So I wanted to go into Washington, D.C. and contact J. Rankin, who was the counsel for the Warren Commission. So I had an opportunity when I went to Washington, D.C. on May the 17th, 1964, to a Secret Service school. I was there actually to go to school. But the night that I arrived there, I tried to contact J. Rankin through the White House switchboard. Now, there was an agent with me, Agent Gary McLeod, and he walked into the telephone booth next to mine. And since I never heard the money drop, you know, it used to make a ding. It was the old type telephone. You could hear a ding-a-ling when
That's right, sir.
When the phone dropped. Yes, and so I didn't hear that, so I knew that he was listening to what I was trying to do. And as a matter of fact, I had to abort that call and try to set up some other means of trying to contact J. Rankin, who was the counsel. Now, immediately the next day, before noon, the Secret Service went to my hotel room in the Willard Hotel. They packed up all of my clothes. I didn't know anything about this then. They were going through my room. They packed up everything, threw it in my suitcase and everything. In the meantime, Mr. Howard Anderson, who was the personnel director, he came over to the school, the Secret Service school that was being held in the Treasury Building, and said that I was needed in Chicago, back in Chicago, because they had seized a counterfeiting ring in Villa Park here in Illinois, which is a little suburb of Chicago. And I flew back with an Inspector McCann and Inspector and McLeod, who was an agent who was going to school with me. And I flew back. I was met by several agents at the airport, O'Hare Field Airport, and they drove me into Chicago to the Secret Service office, all the time saying that they had discovered this big counterfeiting plant that's in Villa Park, and they needed my expertise as an agent in order to bring it to a close. So I came here, and they took me to the United States Attorney's office. And to be frank with you, they had me snookered. I mean, I thought this thing was really an investigation. I didn't know what they had in store for me. But I sat there for about 6 hours. They didn't let me eat anything, talk to anybody, for fear that they were telling me that one of the suspects might be in the building and recognize me and blah, blah, blah. They had a big pretext going. And about 6 hours later, Mr. Martineau, who was the supervisor here in Chicago, walked into the room and said, "We're going to charge you with soliciting a bride." My jaw almost hit the floor. I said, "What? You know that's ridiculous." And he looks me right in the eye with a little smile on his face. He says, "You prove it." Now, it's very difficult to prove a negative, especially when all of the records and things are in the hands of the person who is trying to send you away. You just can't do it.
Yeah.
No,
it's a frame up.
You just can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he was behind it. Mr. Martineau was behind the frame up. Now, whether or not he had orders from Washington, D.C. to do it from James Rowley, who was then the chief of the United States Secret Service, I believe that he was acting on the chief's orders, was to silence me, to quiet me any way possible. And they had what they had when I came to Chicago. I finally realized that they arrested me that night on the 18th, locked me up on the word of two counterfeiters. These were men who had made a career out of criminal activity. One of them, Joseph Spagnola, had been arrested some 50 times. And Frank Jones had been arrested by me. As a matter of fact, he was awaiting trial for a third conviction, of which he would have gone into the penitentiary for the rest of his life. And these are the men that they put on me. I was supposed to have given one some document to give to the other one for $50,000. And it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. And now I went through 2 trials. And the strange thing happened in the first trial. The federal district judge, the Honorable J. Terry, called the jury out while they were deliberating as to what the verdict should be after the evidence had been presented. The judge called the jury out and said, in my opinion, the defendant is guilty of counts 1, 2, and 3 of the indictment. And he tells the jury further, he says, now go in and deliberate on the instructions that I just gave you. In other words, he wants them to deliberate on me being guilty above any other thing. Now, our Constitution is against that. The jury is supposed to make that decision, and when the judge did that, he in fact became a juror because he had voted and asked them to vote with him. Well, they didn't. I ended up in a hung jury, and I went to trial for a second time. About a week and a half later, the judge scheduled a second trial. Now, during this trial, the judge, knowing what happened during the first trial, when about 5:30 that evening on August the 12th, that's 1964, it's when I went on trial on 64 CR 324.
Yes, sir.
When I went, when the jury was deliberating, what he did was put me, my attorney, and all the spectators out of the building. He locked us out of the building, had the guard to put the chains on the doors, and the whole building was empty. The only people who were in there was the jury, the Secret Service agents, FBI agents, CIA representatives, and the jury. And the judge had said he was going home for the day and he was going to shut down the court. But on the way home, I heard that the jury had just reached a verdict, and I knew that I had to be guilty under the circumstances. So they sentenced me on September the 4th of 1964 to a term of 6 years in the custody of the federal prison.
And, sir, I was wondering, when did Spagnoli come forward and tell everybody that he was indeed perjuring himself and he was lying?
Yes, on January 20th, 1965. I turned 30 on January the 19th. And I really needed a miracle. My wife and I doing a little birthday party that we had here. We were just talking about the case. I really needed something to happen, you know, because I knew that they were out really to send me away to the penitentiary and do some other things. And lo and behold, my attorney called me on the 20th of January 1965 and said that Spagnoli had just admitted perjury in your trial. I couldn't believe it. What possessed this man to come out like this? So of course, that helped me quite a bit. And we got a copy of the record of Spagnoli's admission that he had committed perjury. And he further said that he had committed this perjury at the instigation of the United States Attorney. And he named the United States Attorney, Richard Seitz, and not only did he name him, he had a piece of paper that this attorney had given him to remember his testimony, what he is to testify to.
Was there any
all of this?
Sir, was there any criminal action taken against those gentlemen?
No, not any whatsoever. Not any, not even an admonishment, not even an indictment. Nothing happened. And when my attorney appealed the case before the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago, the chief judge of the Circuit Court of Appeals called this attorney, Richard Seitz, before the bar and questioned him. He wanted to know, did he solicit perjured testimony in my trial? You know, the United States Attorney took the Fifth Amendment. He says, if I answer that question, I cannot answer it because it tends to incriminate me. And do you know they still affirmed the conviction and sent me away to prison for 6 years?
And there was no recourse at all. So I'm just wondering, did the Attorney General's Office of the United States, I know Bobby was an Attorney General at that point.
No,
did they try to
yeah.
Did he try to intervene on your behalf at all?
No.
Nothing.
No, he didn't. He didn't. Nobody tried to intervene in my behalf. And when I had written letters to about everybody that I knew,
yes, sir,
who should, I wrote Adam Clayton Powell, I wrote many of the senators, Senator Long from Missouri, who was in the Judiciary Committee at that particular time. I wrote those people trying to get someone interested to stop this disregard of the court procedures that I had just went through. Because I knew that once the government got me in custody, they were not only going to imprison me, but they were going to take some very dreadful acts against me in order to assure that I not be available to say anything.
Let's talk about.
Sure enough, yes.
Let's talk about some of those dreadful acts, sir.
Yes. What the government does, and usually they try to put you in a position where the American people won't believe anything that you say. That affects your credibility in a negative way. And they could not kill me outright because there was just too much information, too much pressure on the case. It was widely publicized. So the second best thing that the government does, second avenue that they take, is to declare a person insane. Mm-hmm. And so that was what I knew that I had to guard against, because they would, once that they hang that tag on you, then you're not believable. They said that anything, if I were talking to you right now and had once been declared insane, nobody would believe anything that I said. So this is where they wanted me, and they proceeded to try to do just that when I went to Springfield, Missouri. They put me in after I was there, assigned to the camp for about a year. I had an argument with one of the patients there who was a psychotic patient. He was being treated there for being insane. And I had an argument with him, which they blamed me for the argument, saying that I'd been an ex-Secret Service agent and this guy drew a butcher knife on me, and I should have been able to take that butcher knife from him without any problem. Yeah, and so they put me in the psychiatric ward and forced me to take psychotropic drugs.
Can we talk? I was going to ask you, sir, how did you manage to keep your sanity, your spirits up during those trying times? Mr. Bolden?
Yes, I'm here.
How did you manage to keep your spirits up, sir, and your sanity surrounding those times?
During those particular times, well, the first thing that I had to do was keep those psychotropic drugs out of my system. So I had to devise a way that I could take those drugs and remove them from my system, and I did that, and I explained it probably elaborate in the book. There was a certain procedure that I did in order to make sure that these drugs did not take a hold on me, because I knew that the government, if they want to destroy your mind, they start out with a mild sedative and they get stronger and stronger and stronger the longer that you're there, and until they put you in a condition that you don't know where you are, what it's all about. Then you're in their custody for the rest of your life. So what happened is that after I had devised this plan, I had won about 50%. So now they still wanted to continue on and try to declare me insane. And I think that they were somewhat puzzled on why those drugs were not taking an effect on me. So while I was in that psychiatric ward, which they threw me in, see, they can throw you in there for 30 days in order to evaluate you. That's the way that they put it. But they're not supposed to give you any medication except ordered by the court. Now, but they violated that rule when it came to me. So they scheduled me for insanity hearing, that's the chief of classification of parole, put me on the list for a sanity hearing, which was to take place on about August the 7th of, that was 1967. And he was going to be the one who was going to sign the paper that I was insane. Now, it just so happens that a certain thing happened to him where he could not be there when I appeared before the board, and they sent me right back to the camp because he himself committed suicide. That's a person who was saying that he was going to declare me insane. He himself committed suicide the day before that I was supposed to appear before the committee.
Do you feel that may have anything to do with your case, sir?
His suicide?
Yes, sir.
I think that what happened was this, Brent, is that, see, there's a higher law than the law of man. There is also a law of God.
Absolutely.
And I'm a firm believer in that. And I believe that they had violated the law of man so thoroughly and so fully that as an automatic reaction, the law of God began to kick in, and they say, you're going far enough with him. And God stepped in and delivered me from the hands of those people who were about to declare me insane. It was impossible for them to go on with any procedure without the chief classification and parole there. Now, they could have continued the procedure if any other of the members had been absent or not there or died or whatever, but not the chief of the classification and parole. He was the one who had to sign the document verifying that I had indeed been found insane, and they were going to change my number to a psychiatric number and hold me for the rest of my life. I knew that's what they had at stake. But I had a lot of faith, which as a young man, I was very religious, and I'm very religious now. I think that there was a interference, there was a retributive act of grace from God, and that's what saved me.
I think so too, sir. And it's wonderful to hear that in some small way that your faith carried you through those tumultuous times and gave you the courage to go forward. Folks, if you're just joining us, you are probably riveted to your seat as I am. It's very emotional when I interview Mr. Bolden for me, because he is very authentic. He's the real deal, folks, and it's just extremely emotional for me. The Echo from Dealey, Plaza, the true story of the first African American on the White House Secret Service detail. This is a man, folks, if you have children, this is the man that you want your children to use as a role model. I know it's important to have sports role models, but this man has the fortitude and the courage that is so needed in our world today. The book can be gotten at any Chapters Indigo right across the country. If you go to the www.brenthollandshow.com website, www.brenthollandshow.com show. Just click on the book cover there. That'll take you right to Chapters Indigo. You can order it online. You probably get it 24, 48 hours. When you were down in the pits, sir, I know there were several things that took place. An active intervention, a fire specifically.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could tell the folks about that.
Yes. Well, I was at 21 East. All of the inmates at Springfield, Missouri, that's a medical center in Springfield, Missouri, they have a name for this place, and they call it the Tomb. And that's where I was, in that 21 East Psychiatric Division. And they're for the worst of criminals, people who have killed, murdered, and have done all sorts of treacherous things. And most of them are incurably insane, or haven't been made by the government as being incurably insane. There's a lot of screaming at night, a lot of hollering and cursing that are going back there, and it's just a madhouse. So they call it the Tomb. And when they put me there, I was there my 10th day there. I remember just as clearly as I can. It was about the 16th of July, and I had this vision. And that there was a vision where I believe it was a holy angel from God. It couldn't have been anybody but a holy angel from God, and I do believe in the angels of God. But he or she came to me in my room in a vision of light and told me not to worry, that I would be free from that stern cell that they had me in, and had me locked up for 10 days. They had me in there without any clothes. I didn't have any clothes or shoes or shoelace or anything like that, and they hadn't let me bathe or come out of that room for 10 whole days. I couldn't turn the lights on or off. They did that from the outside. They flushed the toilet from the outside. And so there I was. And when I saw this vision, it told me not to fear, and that God had heard me, that God was with me. And the very next morning, there wasn't even 8 hours between the vision and daylight, I heard the fire bells ringing in the ward, and they were ringing loud, and the guards were running back and forth past my room. And I knew that something was going on because I could smell the smoke. And I heard one guard holler to another one that there was a fire in one of the cells down near the end of the hall. And this guard who was still on his way there said, "Can't be." Said, "We don't have anybody in there." Said, "It's been vacant." And he says, "Well, the room is burning. Everything in there was burning. The mattress and everything was afire." And they couldn't figure out how that could be with nobody in there. And so it made it necessary for them to come to my cell. And for the first time in those 10 days, the guard turned that key, and I walked out from behind that 3-inch thick steel door into, like, it was almost like making parole, even though I was just walking into another lobby area of that ward. It was, being outside was just like freedom, man. I tell you, nobody can really explain to you how it feels to be alone with nothing but your thoughts, and the lights being turned out at 7 o'clock. Nobody talks to you except those who want to give you some medication, or the psychiatrist come by and talk to you through the door, and the guards push your blankets and things in through a little slot in the door. It just was horrible. It was horrible, Brother Holland, and I wonder sometimes how I endured it. And after I came out of that situation, as a matter of fact, when they let me out, that 10 days because of that fire, they had to let me out. And I sat across from one inmate that I had seen, witnessed myself. He stabbed another inmate on the elevator that I was on, stabbed him to death, cut his guts out. And I witnessed this, and here I am. They put his inmate, his first name was James, I won't say his last name, but this guy come over and sat down, and we had a conversation about that day that he killed another inmate. And you can imagine how I felt at first when I recognized this guy, and I was in there with him, of course I was on my guard, and the silverware that we were eating with, I wasn't afraid that he could do anything with that because most of it was plastic or cardboard. But we had a conversation, and I tell you, I wouldn't take anything for that experience. So it was a great experience for me. It was a learning experience too, and I came out of it and for the best of mankind, I believe. I have something to contribute to mankind.
You certainly do, sir. What an incredible man you are. It is truly an honor to speak with you today. Folks, if you're joining us, Mr. Abraham Bolden, first African-American Secret Service agent, handpicked by John F. Kennedy himself. The Echo from Dealey Plaza is the name of the book. It can be gotten right across the country at any Chapters Indigo. Oh, Mr. Bolden, can we counter this negative, as I always like to do, with a positive? Can we talk? Thank you, sir. Sir, I guess we're going to have to start to wrap up now. Is there anything, sir, that you would like to leave the people with?
Well, what I would like to leave the people with is this, is that when trouble occurs, when such things happen like the assassination of presidents or leaders, heads of state, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, whoever it is, we have to stand up and be alert. We who want to stand for democracy, we that want to stand for equality and justice, we can't just stand up when things just affect us alone. We have to stand up wherever we find corruption in the democratic process. And that's our obligation to the American people. It's our obligation to our children, and it's our obligation to God to be the best people that we can be while we're on this planet Earth.
That's beautiful, sir. I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight, sir, on our show. And I just want to wish you God bless and all the very best always.
Thank you for having me very much. Thank you.
I'll be in touch again, sir. Thank you so much.
Good day.
Bye, sir. Abraham Bolden, ladies and gentlemen. What an incredible, incredible man.